Hey Creagears, and welcome to the final Custom Amiibo video of this Custom Amiibo Month. Finally we get to cross off all of our semi-run amiibos with today's video showing you guys how we made the final one, the Scrapper. As was the same with the last 3 videos, we first got to make the solid base of the amiibo. For the Scrapper, this meant making the card first. For this we started with the underside of the machine by first gluing a wooden button to a 1 cm high cylinder. This was then marked to be halved on the jigsaw. And an even bigger button was then also divided into 3 to be cut as the front bumper of the card. After these were cut, they got a good sanding, especially since the buttons weren't completely round at the edges. After the sanding, we then got to attach another 1 cm wooden cylinder to the flat side of the base to start on the exposed motor. Then adding the piston covers on both sides of the motor using a square chopstick. And the design was finished using a little jam as the shaft of the pistons in the middle of the cylinder. Next was the turn for the bumper to be attached, so for this I drilled some holes into the part to add some pieces of aluminium wire. These same holes were then drilled into the base where they will attach, but instead of the same angle, these were drilled into a straight line. This was so we can actually insert the wires from the front without struggling with those different angles. And while we have the wires out, why not also add 2 short pieces of wire to the top of the base for the joysticks to control the Scrapper. Afterwards we're working on the exhausts. For these we add 2 holes on each side and add a wire to both. To these we then add these cut parts from a cylindrical bead, not cut in half but more 1/3 and 2/3 of the way. The longer one is then added to the top wire with some superglue and accelerant, and afterwards the same is done for the shorter one with the bottom wire. And the cut ends are then drilled for a bit more access on the inside. Once all 4 are attached, we then get to make the armor of the card. For this we started with some plastic card for the front shield first. Cutting out a crooked shield of an Octotrooper actually. With an opening for the window in the front and a raised edge using some halved coffee stirring sticks. Then the 2 pans on the sides are made with a plastic card rectangle that then gets some edges from some more hole coffee stirring sticks this time. Using superglue to attach them at an angle and using accelerant to make them set up quickly and sturdy. And this was then repeated for both. But the bigger pan on top was made the same way, but instead of stirring sticks, this uses a 5mm band of plastic card. This makes it just a little bit bigger, but also a bit harder to assemble because of the plastic glue. That's also why it's done off camera. Even still, it does need some handles on top, so we're happy to help out with some more aluminium wire. Then we use these 2mm white strips of craft paper to make the raised lines of the 2 pans on the sides, rounding off both ends and then gluing them to the plastic bottom. After which we then also add these handles from some more aluminium wire. Finally, I get to make the 5mm white strips that will connect all the different parts of the scrapper. By having the shield glued to the front of the base and then adding 3 strips to the top and both sides to connect the different pans. Also playing around with different ends to the strips to make ones rounded, chamfered or even just straight edges. Then one by one we got to add the pans to the base to make the body of the card. And so with the base made, we could finally start on the parts of the scrapper that we need to make with epoxy clay. Starting as we most often do with the ink on the base. With its indentations using a ball tool and then a little wave that we add to one end of the figure to add the effect of movement in the Saminid, like it's pushing all of the ink from its speed. And once those are added, we can then add the card to the ink to really have it within the ink. Then we use the final parts of the clay to make the Saminid that's controlling the card. By making a snake of clay, splitting one pointed end to make the mouth, and then molding this to face forwards. Next the tail fin is made by separating a little triangle from the clay and then flattening this. Then back to the face to define the gills. After which it's laid to rest, because the figure is really quite soft without an aluminium base to work from. So while that is going to harden for a bit, we get to prepare the other parts of the body. Like the 2 parts of his hair, or is it the back fin? Of course, we also need some eyes to be added. And lastly, we got just enough to make the 2 front fins. And after letting that dry and adding the separate parts, we actually go back to the card. Because even after letting it sink in for a day, I still didn't like how the armor came out. So I wanted to try something to make the new parts. By heating this piece of plastic card, which I've clamped to this piece of wood with an opening, and then pushing another block of wood through it, we were able to make a brand new set of side pans for the scrapper by heat forming them. After which we then get to cut them out from the extra plastic with some scissors. And then with a better base made, I get to remove the old pieces from the base. I do want to keep the top pan since that wasn't too bad, but both of the sides and the front shield get to be remade. So with the plastic card parts of the pants just finished, it would only be natural to work on the shield next. So we get to draw out a new version of the shield and then score and snap this out of the sheet. Then we also get to snap out the window opening. And this time I got to drill and snip out the vents before I bent the shield into shape. So after a bit of sanding, I got to prepare the shield for bending with some tongues for a straight edge. But after the bending, I got the idea to try and heat form the raised edges on the window frame instead of making them out of the popsicle sticks. with a nice Yosemite grey for the already primed white driver. Next, a gunmetal is mixed with black to use for most of the card. On all of the pants and the front shield. And not forgetting about those little details we added on the inside of the figure. And to give the metal a chance to dry, we then get to add a light olive grey to the eyes and the belly of the salmonid. But that was not the only kind of metal the card has. Next we go over the top pan and the front shield with a normal gunmetal. And then the driver gets some little extra details added to his nose and the ends of his fins using some stone grey. Next, the last shade of metal is added to the card with a bright silver for all of the rivets that connect to the armor. And the small silverware that hangs from the card. And the wires that connect the bumper to the base. And finally the exhaust get their color.
Mini! You're ready!
Next, the driver get their light green pants. And some red for within the mouth. After which we can then finally get a thin strip of 2mm EVA foam for the belt of the driver. This we can then weave through the hair and glue on both sides. Then the leftover parts of this belt can be cut into some very small pieces to glue to the inside of the mouth as the teeth of the salmonid. Then these teeth get a nice coating of white before we continue with an orange for the iris of the salmonid. And while this dry, we can also just easily work on the hair to color this with a nice dry yellow. Then we grab a black to paint the handles of the spatula and the spoon on the card. Next, some rivets are also painted onto the strips. And on the edges of the front shield. And this black is then also used for the pupil and the belt of the driver. And finally we get to add the green acrylic paint to the base of the custom amiibo. And also to the bumper on the front. by now you're probably wondering, why did you wait so long to add the green to the amiibo? That's because I also wanted to add some green splatters to the body of the scrapper. But for that we first needed the metal colors to be added, because it would just look off if they were added on top of the green. So after 4 layers of green, we got one more thing to make for some heat forming, the window of the shield. Which, after making the bug and doing the forming, also gets some scores into the plastic as the cracks of the window as seen in game. Which we then press into the opening. And afterwards we add the plastic glue to attach the part as one solid figure. And while we're already attaching, why not also add the stamina driver to the inside by holding him in place and then gluing him to the touching surfaces.
Woody!
Then we finally get to make some water effects for this Saminate. And for this amiibo, it's going to be in the form of the water shooting from the exhaust. So for this, we get to make 2 sets of 2 splashes of water that we make using a cone made from parchment paper, to which we can then add some hot glue. Then we can lock the shape by cooling the surface with some pressurized air, and then we can completely cool it and help it release from the parchment paper by rinsing it with some water. This we then do twice with the smaller cone and twice with a bigger cone. This process then gives us one for the bigger exhaust and one for the smaller exhaust on both sides, which we can then lock in place using some more hot glue for the final time. And at last we can add the transparent paint to all of the hot glue and water parts.
Hey, away!
Must resist urge to add paint to plastic window. But now that the green paint has been added, we only need to add the gloss varnish to the water effects. And with that, we can officially announce the Splatoon 3 Next Wave Scrapper Custom Amiibo finished.
Whee!
Hey Creagears, Roboy here, and we hope you enjoyed the last of the next wave Custom Amiibo Month. But what you said wasn't completely true, Muna.
Hola!
Because we have one more thing that we're going to make for this Custom Amiibo Month. As some of you guys might have already seen, the floor in our display case is getting quite full. So for the final part of this Custom Amiibo Month, I want to try and make a Diorama of Sockeye Station, brand new map shown off in the semi-run Next Wave trailer. With enough space to house all of our brand new amiibos and the perfect place to put our missing fish stick. Which will also allow us to include a motor to make the little small fry, or actually baby stingers, to fly and circle around the tower. But if you want to see how we're going to pull this one off, you better subscribe and ring that bell to make sure you get a notification once we get that massive project done. But that's going to be all from us for now. Keep those creative gears turning, and we will see you guys in the next video.